Ciao a tutti and welcome to a new video. So in this video we are going to talk about the GGL.node object, and we are also going to talk about a bit how OpenGL objects in Max correlate to each other. Okay, because sometimes it's not so clear, since usually in Max we got objects that we can connect with cables, right? But in the OpenGL world we got all these objects that actually are not connected with cables to anything, but they still work, right? So we're going to see how does this actually work, and we're going to see how to use especially the GGL.node object in Max. Okay, so first of all I will just import my little snippet with the world and the camera. So if you don't have any idea what a JIT world object is and what a JIT camera is, I invite you to check my introductory tutorials about OpenGL. I'll put the link in the description. But anyway, this is basically just our rendering object. So it's the object responsible for creating the window, is the object responsible for rendering inside it, and the camera is just like a virtual camera that we can use to move around. I'm moving around using the WSDQZ keys on my keyboard, and this allows me basically to wander around in the scene. Okay, in the scene there is now only this GGL grid shape object. And how is this that this grid shape object is rendered inside the window, even if it's not connected to any cable? Well, that's because it has the name game as an argument, which is basically setting the draw2 attribute to the name of the context I want this shape to be drawn into. For example, if I say another thing, for example ciao, and this sphere disappears from our rendering window because it's now rendering into the context, the OpenGL context called ciao, which basically doesn't exist. So it's important to remember this word, OpenGL context. It's basically the context. It means it's basically the place where we are going to render our three-dimensional shapes. Okay, this is only about three-dimensional stuff. Okay, you can say this is also about two-dimensional things when working with textures, but in the end it's always going to end up in a three-dimensional space, okay, even if it's actually a flat video in the end. So this is all related to three-dimensional graphics, computer graphics. Alright, so if we want to draw back our GGL grid shape in this context, what do? We give it the name of the context, which is game. Which, by the way, I just chose myself. It's not a keyword, it's not something that you have to write exactly as this is. I could have wrote whatever. I just chose game a lot of time ago, and this just stuck with it, because the snippet is always as the same rendering context. Alright, and the camera as well is the same rendering context written as an argument because it's a GL object. So all the GL objects need this argument to know where they should draw, okay? So they all draw to the same rendering context. For example, if I attach a GGL material object, I also give it the rendering context game, okay? So now our sphere looks even better. It's making it a bit brighter with matte diffuse. Alright. Okay, and let's talk now about the GGL.node object. Now the GGL.node, it's a bit like a rendering context on its own, okay? It's a bit like the JIT world object. In fact, has even an erase color attribute. And even has an FSAA attribute, a full-scale anti-aliasing attribute, exactly like the JIT world object. Now, the thing with the GGL.node, as you can see, I gave it the same name as our rendering context because it needs to draw to our rendering context, right? But also this GGL.node has a name. This GGL.node has a name on its own, so we give it a name. Call it Node. You can call it whatever. I call it Node. And this means now that this object is rendering into the JIT world object, but we can have other objects to draw to the GGL.node instead of drawing to the JIT world, to the main rendering context. Okay, so this is like a sub-rendering context. So if we want our object to draw to the GGL.node object, first of all, we need to give to the GGL.node the attribute capture and set it to 1. Which means it is now actually a real sub-rendering context. Until we give it the capture attribute, it's not. So if the capture attribute is set to 0, the node object is just going to behave a bit like a transformation node. So we could, for example, have this grid shape attached to the node from the middle output, connect to 3D object through route to draw to this GGL node. But until we give it the capture one attribute, then this behaves a bit like a transformation node. So, for example, we can scale these objects directly from the node, for example. So it basically becomes like a little world of its own that you can scale and transform and so on. For example, we could even rotate it, I think, maybe position. Yeah, exactly. I never use it in this way because there are other ways to do that. But you can also choose to use it like that. So, but when we give it the capture one attribute, then what happens? Basically, we can take this shape and draw it to the node. Okay, so now it's not drawing anymore to the JIT world object, it's drawing to this other sub-rendering context, which is GGL node. And this happened because I gave it the attribute draw to, which means, okay, to who do you have to draw? Draw to node. Cool. So if we attach a JIT window now here to the left output, we can basically see that our object is being captured into a texture that is being output by the GGL node. Okay, that's actually also gave the same rendering context to the GGL material, even if it was already rendering properly. So now we got our object, instead of being rendered in the JIT world, is being rendered into the GGL node as a texture. So this is a texture. If you take a look at this, it says GGL texture. Okay. Now the capture attribute of the GGL node can also be set to numbers higher than 1, which means it's going to render more texture, not just the texture with our shape inside, but other texture that contain other information about these objects. So let's give it a try. Let's say capture 2, and as you can see, Max is freaking on me, and this is apparently because of the full-scale anti-aliasing attribute. So once you... I don't know if this is something related to GL3, probably yes. I think this is something related to GL3, this bug, but basically if you use capture 2, you cannot use full-scale anti-aliasing on the node, which is actually not strictly necessary. Let's take it out. Okay, but now what we got is that we got a couple of textures coming out of the GGL node object. So let's actually unpack them and see what we get. So let's unpack 3 symbols, because these are 3 symbols. Right, and we are interested in these 2 numbers here, these numbers that start with U, because this is the address in memory of our texture. So let's prepend to these numbers, let's prepend GGL textures. These are the name of our textures in the memory of the computer. So let's prepend that, suck and suck, and let's see what we get. Can't understand GGL textures. In fact, it's textures. I don't know why I wrote textures. Alrighty. So let's see. I think we got to recreate this object. Alright. Okay, so let's see what we got. Now this is as we can see, this is our object. I can still use the camera, by the way. The camera in our world is still influencing the position of the object. We could actually draw the camera as well inside the node. So let's maybe do that. Okay. So this first texture is simply the color texture of our object. The second texture contains something interesting. This is the normals component of our object. So I spoke about normals in some tutorials already, but basically normals are the vectors that are used in the lighting calculation. So since this is something that we could need also in post-processing, the GGL node object gives us a way to get also the normals. And where are actually those textures coming from? Where those textures are coming from the GGL material shader, which is contained inside the GGL material object. So, in fact, if you see, if I remove the material, the textures are going to disappear, because it's actually the shader contained inside the GGL material that gives us those texture. Let's actually see how this shader looks like with the message get GL3 shader. We can send this message not to the GGL material but to the GGL grid shape, and we get the shader that is automatically generated every time we connect a material to an object. So this is our shader. Now let's go all the way at the bottom of it, and you can see that it has two outputs. One is the output color 1, which simply has the color of our shape. The second, as you can see, contains the normals, NN, the normalized normals, but also the distance of our object from the camera. Okay, so this is the distance of our object from the camera, and as you can see, this is a vector 3, this is a float, so this is going to be in the fourth plane of this texture. So let's go and take it out. So let's use a GGL Pix. Let's give it the drawing context of node. Let's take it, put it here. Let's go inside. Let's switch RGB. And then let's switch A. So from the output one, we are going to switch RGB. Let's actually concat this with 1. So we're going still to have an alpha value of 1. And here we're just going to get the alpha value, which contains the distance from camera of the object. Alrighty. So let's actually connect this here to the first output, which is the normals. Let's create another JitP window. And let's see, whoops. And let's see what we get. Okay. So we are getting, one is simply going to be the alpha value of the race color. In fact, if we set it to 0, we should get a full black thing. Always have to recreate the object once we modify the node, exactly. But if we make our camera really far from the object, we can see that this value is going to become more white and more white. And that's because it's basically inversely proportional. No, it's actually directly proportional to the distance. The more distant we are, the more white it's gonna get. But what is the maximum value to which it will get completely white? This is the far clip. So as we can see, this is the distance divided the far clip. So the far clip is actually contained inside our camera. Let's draw the camera back to the world, because I'm not sure this then is going to be the same far clip. So let's draw the camera back to the world. And let's get the attribute here, near clip, there should be an attribute far clip, exactly. So if you make it 10, then this is only going to divide the distance by 10, which means when we are farther than 10, first it's going to disappear, because it's going outside of the far clip. But yeah, it will go from 0, when we are exactly at the position of the object, to 1, when the object is at distance 10 from the camera. Okay, so this is the far clip that determines this value. So with this value, for example, we can do a lot of things. We can this value is used, for example, in the depth of field effect. Is with the GGL pass object. It's used in a lot of different effects, post-processing effects. So what do I mean actually with post-processing effect? The thing is that once we got this object in a texture, then we can do whatever we want with it, right? Let's actually create another one of these fellas. Let's give it a shape as a cube, and let's maybe position it a bit on the left. Okay, just to have a more kind of complex scene. Okay, so now that we got this this scene, what if we want to render it back to the rendering window? Well, we can simply use a GGL video plane, which draws actually to game, not to Node, because this object needs to be drawn to the final context. And then we give it transform reset 2, which means it's going to cover the whole space of the screen. So if we give it transform reset 0, which is by default, this is just going to be a square, right, in the world. But if we give it transform reset 2, this is going to cover the whole world, this our video plane. So let's actually give it a color, so maybe this is more understandable. It's more clear. So if we give it transform reset 0, no, this doesn't really work. Let's do like this then. Let's create a GGL Pix that draws to Node. and let's just give it a value, a fixed value, a color of 1. Exactly. So this is how, and let's set the color also here to 1, because the color gets multiplied by the texture by default. So here we can see that our video plane is simply just a square in our three-dimensional world, right? That's what I meant by saying that in the end it's all about three-dimensional shapes, also if they are two-dimensional like a video plane. But if we say transform reset 2, we now cannot move with the camera, we are not moving anymore the square, because this square is always stuck to the world. It's always covering the full rendering window. Okay, so if we pass our input instead of this just white color, we will have the objects like if they were normally rendered to the game rendering context. Okay, so once we got them in the texture world realm, we can do a lot of stuff with those. We can do all the effects that we've seen in some other videos and that are included, for example, in the file browser. For example, like all the cheat-sheet shaders of the GGL slab object. For example, I don't know, all this saturate stuff, all this color correction stuff. But we can also invent some effects of our own. For example, like we can use all the objects that we saw in the Gen series to modify our final texture. For example, we can switch some coordinates here, and then we can either just sum them to this texture just to simulate maybe a light that is coming here from the right, or we can say okay, when this is greater than 0.5, and then we're just going to maybe multiply this, so we are cutting half of the image, and we could of course animate that. For example, with a jit mo time draw to game, and then we could use this as our time parameter, pre-plan time, and then we could use these to animate our effects like we did in the Gen series, right? So we could say, for example, module 1, and then suck, and then suck. Okay, so let's say actually let's do like this, not saying greater than something, but simply when this is greater than modulo. Okay, whoop, so suck goes back and then erases the whole thing. And we could instead of having just black and the scene, we could just use a switch object. Just say, okay, this is the condition to test. When this is greater, then use the video. Otherwise, use the color pink, for example. Some fuchsia, actually. Yeah. Woo. Okay. Let's make the speed of this fella a bit slower. Exactly. Okay, so this is how the GGL node object works. You can have multiple nodes. You can add as many nodes as you want in the scene. The important thing is that you have got to draw the objects to the single nodes. We can also draw the object to two nodes at the same time. GGL node game, so it means draw to game, and let's give it the capture 1 attribute, and let's say name node2. And we can say, okay, draw to node, but also to node2. Node2. So now we got this object also inside this other node. Okay, only this object here, because this is drawn to both this node and to that node. So now we could, for example, also draw this, sum this other texture to this other one, and just have this object, for example, twice as bright. It's not really the best case, but for example, in this way, the object is still present even when we override the previous one with our little trick here. So this could be something interesting, right? Oh, and I want to say one last thing for this video. Basically, this value here, the normals and the length here, the distance from the camera, is not something that we cannot change. We can change that, not by changing this shader, but by creating our own custom shader and then write the values that we want to these variables, okay? Instead of writing these, we could, for example, write, okay, just give me the color white as that. I wonder what happens if I save it. I think I will save it. No, it doesn't matter, because anyway, it's going to be generated automatically every time, so let's not save it. We can't save that, but we can create our custom shader, as I do actually in my GLSL shader series, which is also on my channel. So if you are curious about shaders, check it out. Okay, so this is, in short, how the jit.gl.node object works. It's very powerful. You can do a lot with it. I use it a lot. If you're serious about creating visuals in Max, you have to understand how this works, and you have to use it because you can achieve the best effects with that. And in fact, actually, let me add something else before we close this video. You can also use the jit.gl pass in conjunction with the jit.gl.node, which means, for example, this means that we say, okay, this object draws to node, to the first node, for example. Now, what is happening is that this is outputting already, even if it's not connected to the jit.gl node, is already outputting the texture inside the jit.gl node, because it's connected by this rendering context. Okay, so if we choose an effect, for example, fx name, I don't know, what do we have? I think Bloom. This is called Bloom. Let me check the thing. It's called Bloom, exactly. And then we say, okay, threshold, I don't know, something super low. So now we got these objects glowing. And we could, for example, instead of going with the texture from the node, we can use the texture from the jit.gl pass, and this is what we are going to render as our final texture. Okay, so the jit.gl pass is connected to the jit.gl node by the rendering context name. Okay, so a bit complex, but this is it. This is it. You got the jit.gl node, you got the video plane, and you got the jit.gl pass, and the jit.gl peaks and the jit.gl slab objects. This is all you need in order to make post-production, kind of post-rendering effects on your visuals. A bit like you would do it in, for example, After Effects or Premiere. But this you can do in real time. That's the beauty of OpenGL and computer graphics in general, and Max, that allows us to use them. Okay, so this was it. Maybe a bit complex, maybe a bit ill-explained. So if you got questions, just let me know, and I will go over those topics a bit maybe slower and a bit maybe more in depth, but this is the gist of it. This is how this stuff works. Okay, so cool, this was it, and as always I invite you to check out my website, where I got now more than 100 videos. This is going to be number 105, which are also archived in tags. So you can you can look for videos according to what you're looking for, and you can choose the tag that you want, and you should be able to find a lot of material, whatever you are looking for. And if something you're looking for is not here, let me know, because I will create a video about it. And then I also got here, apart from my video tutorials, the patches. So this is the section where I have all my patches shared on Patreon and for free, and in general online, and there is quite some interesting stuff about creating visuals inside Max. It's all about that. So some of the patches I share on Patreon, which is a crowdfunding platform, which actually allows me to create these tutorials and all these patches and spend so much time patching instead of working in a pizzeria. Okay, so this was it, self-promotion apart. I thank you for watching this video, and see you soon with some more content. Ciao!